as I said, we're going to be covering off, we'll be taking questions as well. Some of you may read that webinar topic title and say, I have questions straight away. How do we deal with trust, transparency, and conflict resolution in this remote first era? So make sure you make a note, mental note or otherwise, and we'll try to endeavor to get to your questions as we move along. I want to thank you again on behalf of SafetyWing. SafetyWing sponsors this fabulous webinar series, super successful. Lots of my peers have been guests, and it's always amazing to have such insightful panel discussions. If you don't know me, Rowena Hennigan, LinkedIn top voice, top 10 in the world in remote work, and I am delighted to be here as a moderator monthly for these SafetyWing webinars. You can check out my profile and connect on LinkedIn. Lovely to hear from you over there. So make sure you look me up, and I'll happily answer any DMs that come from the SafetyWing audience. I love hearing from you all. And what is SafetyWing? Well, global benefits for the remote workforce. Other than sponsoring these amazing webinars, they are a remote first team themselves, so they organize these because they are really passionate about increasing knowledge and discussion and conversations in our remote first era. If you want to check out their service offerings, you can have a look at the QR codes. You can go to SafetyWing website and check them out. We've got lots and lots of details on the different things that they have to support remote and borderless teams, and we always kick off with showing you their product roadmap, which is really fascinating. SafetyWing are building a global social safety net. We've got the Nomad Insurance, remote health, remote doctor. You can see the SafetyWing product roadmap there. So they're building the future of supporting the borderless companies and organizations that as they come along. So fantastic infrastructure there, and they're a fantastic partner for these webinars. So I really appreciate working with the SafetyWing team and what they're doing for the remote first infrastructure globally. Really appreciate it. Today's agenda, we're always running our little polls. So if you're joining in, you might be for having previously joined, you might know about the poll. We want to get a feel for what type of organization you are. To kick us off, what your plans are. We're going to go into the panel discussion, and as I said, lots of time for Q&A at the end, so keep those questions, keep a note of them, and we'll kick off the poll, please. Charles, got wonderful Charles in the back room there running everything, and he is just amazing. So is your organization borderless? So this is something we do just to understand. We keep track of all this data as well from the webinars, so it helps us understand what kind of profile of people we're getting, and we're looking at the trends over the sequence of webinars. So we've got about 25% voted, so just hit one of these responses. No, maybe you don't have plans, maybe you're in that, you don't know anything about going borderless, and that's why you're here today out of curiosity, or maybe you sit into one of the other categories, or maybe you're firmly down, evolved out, where you've got 3 to 5 or 6 or more countries where you're operating and you have your teams located there. So really, you've operations located. Really interested to see that. We've got about 50%. We normally let these run for a minute or two and see what type of responses come in. So let's see, we've got up at about 60, is it 50, 60 there? We'll give it another minute, and then we'll see what the results are for that. So if you haven't voted, vote, and we'll yeah, up at around 60. I think we can end that in the next few seconds, Charles, when we hit going over 60, so to get those last few votes in. Fantastic. And let's see what the results are. So 20%, that's interesting. Do not have plans at all. So maybe you're here and you're local. So we do have a lot of remote first organizations that operate geographically locally. For some of you who are a bit confused about that, think about big countries, remote first companies that simply operate in the big geography like Australia or one country, and they're simply here for the remote first tips, and that's totally welcomed and fair enough. But then we've got 35% at 6 or more countries, almost 30%, 29% to 3 to 5 countries. So that's really interesting. Thank you for filling that out, and that gives us an idea of the scope of the audience that are here today. So it's fantastic. And now over to our fabulous panelists today. So we've got Angela, the Bunner VP Solutions from ClickUp, I'm going to ask those individuals to pop on their cameras in the next few seconds. Lee Martin, co-organizer of Running Remote and of Time Doctor, and Constantine Michel from Work Motion, who is VP Marketing Communications. Hopefully Constantine is with us. We were having some tech trouble there earlier, but I'm going to invite all the panelists to pop on their cameras just now, and they can do a little bit of an introduction individually. Let's see who joins in. Welcome, welcome. And Liam, I know you're in Canada, but I'm going to go over to Angela first because I missed where you were based, Angela. So let's start with you, and you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi all, I'm Angela Bunner. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area in California on West Coast. I've born and raised in California. My background is all in project management, over 25 years now almost in project management at many different software companies, a lot of time at Oracle. I was also at NetSuite and Clarizen, and I'm now at ClickUp. And I love ClickUp and what we're really trying to evangelize, which is improving how people are more productive by providing a platform for project, task, document, really any kind of work that people are doing and trying to consolidate on a single platform. And we started, I started here about 2.5 years ago during COVID kind of remote work time, and our company basically grew during the remote work time as well. So we work with companies every day that are in the same situation of that evolution of trying to become more efficient in remote work. So I love this topic.
Fantastic, Angela, and a tech veteran. I'm in tech about 24 years, veteran. We survived, Angela. So lovely, lovely to have another female leader as well that's been in the tech space so long. So welcome, welcome, and tuning in today from California. Over to Liam, Montreal, is it Liam today?
It is Montreal, yes. I'm technically in my closet, but I have a very nice closet. And a couple businesses that I've run, Time Doctor, which is time tracking for remote workers. I just actually checked the numbers before we jumped into this call. We have 283,422 people that have self-declared themselves remote that are currently working underneath that platform. I have been co-founder of that business for the past 13 years. Also in the last 6 years, I started a conference called Running Remote, which is very much focused on building and scaling remote teams. And what I'm very passionate about is trying to transition the world to a more remote friendly place. So I'm really excited about talking about this. I think this is, when we talk about trust and transparency, it's critical to be able to think about this in terms of the context of everyone on the planet having access to remote work, which I know in the last few months has actually become somewhat problematic with the push back to the office.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a fantastic panel, and so much experience. I don't want to tot up all our years together, like in terms of experience in remote, but I think it's credit to both of you, and you both said it. When I saw this topic as well, often anyone who follows my content, it's almost trust and transparency come up in every conversation when we talk about how to curate, foster and support a remote first environment. So I think it's a fantastic conversation today. So let's start off with that. I'm not sure whether Constantine's going to join us. Hopefully, if he can, he will. But let's start off with that. I'm going to you, Angela, first on this one. We're going to start off just on the topic just of trust, okay? It's probably such a hard word to start with, isn't it? Because it's one of those things that, certainly for me as a trainer in this space, it's something that, how do you summarize in a nutshell what trust looks like, what it feels like as a remote leader and remote team? So what in the green room, I set you up for this question. Recall, so maybe as experienced panelists, you'll take yourselves back. Recall when you first remembered or you first experienced that trust in action as you were learning as a remote leader or someone setting up a remote first team or company. What is something that you can recall, a story and an experience from a peer that helped you really understand trust in action? So not now about what you act as now as a leader, but something that you can reflect on as a learning experience in relation to trust. So we started to think about that in the green room. Angela, did anything come to mind?
Yeah, I thought I kind of rewinded back 2.5 years ago when I was basically starting teams and hiring. You know, my first day on the job, I basically had to a list of interviews already to talk to, and I had nobody on the team, one person, and I had to grow that team. Over the next 30 days, or actually 90 days, I probably hired 30 people in 90 days. And it's really hard to build relationships and trust when you're growing that fast. And I remember my first priority was finding some leads or managers to help me scale, because I can't manage and hire everything. And so there were 2 key managers that I had to hire early on, and building that trust in the beginning with kind of a stranger was a little bit hard. It really required transparency and making sure that we're in constant communication on what are the goals that we're looking for, and what are we trying to accomplish. And we use ClickUp obviously for everything. So a lot of it is around transparency in thoughts and making sure that action items or decisions are documented, so that like when you like run from one meeting to the next, context switching all the time, it's hard to keep track of what we decide and what we're doing. And so that helps a lot, right, in making sure that everyone's always aligned. And then when you bring more people in the fold, they have context into conversations that happened before. I'm very transparent with the team as well, so that decisions that are made from leaders are shared with my leaders. And that way, I think you build trust with other people when you are open and being clear. And even from the top down, one of Zeb's, our CEO's, kind of core values is around being open and honest and communicating. And we have all hands every week, entire company. And I think that in itself kind of shows that, we want to foster making sure that we're very transparent in what other teams are doing, and what the company's core values are and the key goals. Like, we are very OKR focused here, so that it makes sure that everyone's on the same page.
Wow, wonderful. So loads to unpack there. I thought it was really interesting you said about the sizing and the scaling, and that you went with your leadership development in the teams, Angela, because the framework is there then, isn't it? They can pass on hopefully what they've learned, and it trickles out. So that was fantastic. Also about the OKRs, it comes up a lot on these webinars actually. And that transparency in passing on and recording any agreements and decisions. So lots to unpack there. Some beautiful, beautiful kickoff, thought-inspiring kickoffs there. Liam, anything different you would add? Anything from your experience?
I think in general, what Angela was kind of speaking to was essentially what I call asynchronous management, which is the ability to be able to manage people without directly synchronously interacting with them. And once you have all of those platforms in place on a system like ClickUp, as an example, you can create an environment where the platform essentially becomes the manager, and you don't necessarily need to be that person that's checking in with them every single day. Maybe you can check in with them once a week, or once every 2 weeks, or once a month, or maybe even once a quarter, as an example. And you can allow them to be able to do the work that they need to do, because they have all of the questions answered inside of the systems and processes that you have inside of the organization. And that, for me, is absolutely critical for anyone that's thinking about building a remote company at scale. I've looked at thousands of these remote companies, and the one singular thing that they all have in common is there is that repository available to employees for them to be able to develop themselves out. I think also too, when you come down to trust and transparency, it's really also focused on those KPIs. So what are those numbers? What are you measuring per day, per week, per month, per quarter? How are you being accountable towards that? That is so important. And particularly, it's important to measure that as much as possible, ideally, without actually overstressing the employee or the employer, so that you can measure against that and you can make course corrections very early before things end up going really bad. And you think to yourself, oh, well, we thought that we were on target for our sales numbers for the quarter, and it's 2.5 months into the quarter, and all of a sudden we're not going to hit those numbers at all. You don't want to be surprised by any of those things. So measuring that as often as possible is critical as well.
Totally agree. 2 comments on that. So we as a company do what we call a listen up survey. It's almost like an employee NPS type thing twice a year. And we're very public with the findings, and being transparent about like, hey, we as a company need to work on these things. And so then we create some OKRs that like the people and leadership team are focusing on, but then each department or team has their own areas where they need to focus on because their results said, change management was a challenge, or, have too many meetings, or whatever it is. Like we make sure that people always feel like they are being heard, and also that management or, leadership is being actionable and held accountable for that. So I think that also kind of nurtures a feeling of being heard, and connecting with the rest of the company.
One of the
Fantastic,
things that we
fantastic.
used to do,
Mhm,
which was,
mhm.
we don't do it any longer, but we do it about once per year, is my co-founder, who's the CEO of the company. He gives people a single anonymous poll, which is, should Rob remain the CEO of the company? Yes or no? And if it's over 50%, he will step down.
Wow.
Wow.
Because it's
Interesting.
allowing everyone to have that radical transparency, saying, hey, listen, we're all pirates on the same ship here. We got to vote the captain in and vote him off, possibly inside of the organization. It's never gotten to that point, but one point it did get up to the 30-ish range. And we recognized that we had actually a lot of big problems inside of the organization, and it took us about a year and a half to be able to get that glut out, to get us down to, we float around now about 10 to 15% when we ask that question.
Oh wow, fascinating, fascinating. And can I contextualize that, because I'm just conscious as well that Constantine hasn't joined for whatever tech reason, but I just want to, or whatever is going on in the back, but I just want to contextualize the size of organizations or teams you're both talking about, because I want to respect that often on these webinars we do get smaller companies joining as well. So Angela and Liam, can you, for that advice, because from my experience, are hearing you're probably talking about a certain size of team, definitely, or I'm sure you've both experienced scaling up smaller teams, but at the moment a lot of that advice for me sounds like it's for probably a medium-sized company, correct? Or 100 plus. Liam, how many have you got? A team doctor, I'm not
We're
sure.
a little bit below 200 right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I would say between 100 and 150 is
Mm,
something called the Dunbar number.
yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a sociologist, last name was Dunbar, and he said you can't have more than 100 or 150 friends. And no matter what you want to be able to do, once you surpass that number, those employees will no longer be able to build personal relationships with the owner of the business. They will have to build that relationship with the VPs and the directors and the managers inside of that organization. And also, secondarily, those people cease to become people and they start to become numbers. And there's no way that you can get away from that. And there's lots of people that try to challenge that and say, no, I can connect with everyone. And you will burn yourself out and and have to not work in the company anymore because you'll have to quit. So you need to be able to make sure that you're ready for that Dunbar number. So I tell most people around the 75 headcount range, and particularly to Angela's point, if you're hiring more than 50% new people within the year, it's a huge recipe for possible disaster because the culture of that organization isn't getting communicated to the new people. So you want to be able to be very careful about culture, but generally above 75 people, I would start preparing all of the processes and systems that you need. But essentially, if you're running remote first, you really need to be able to have this from day one and think about it in that context.
Yeah.
Totally, Liam, totally agree. And Dunbar, really glad you brought in that bit of science that you can go, people can have a search of Dunbar, but it's very, very valid. Angela, so Liam's given his sort of scope of experience and size there. Angela, what size, when you were scaling, what did ClickUp grow to from to? I'm just curious as well about that.
Yeah, when I started 2.5 years ago, we were about 100 people. By the end of the year, we were about almost 800. So we grew
Wow.
very quickly. And my org, like I said, started with one person when I first started. And 65 is my org as it is now. And I do agree. I think you get to a point where I can only do skip levels, once a quarter. But I do think it's really important because every single time I do one of those, you find something interesting that is something that you can take action on or some feedback, because I think that connection is really key. I was also very keen on making sure, and the organization is, that we have some on-sites, once or twice a year, because I think that human face-to-face live connection still makes such a difference. So as much as people or companies have the budget to do some in-person meetups, I think it's really key. We do that for different departments that they have, on or off sites at different locations throughout the year. And then regionally, like we have a Bay Area meetup in San Diego, and kind of regional meetups are really key, even if it's cross-departmental people, because I think having that kind of human connection, even if you're in another role, but from the company and culture and hearing about what people's projects are on are really key, because it makes people feel connected on whatever role it is that they have in the company.
Fantastic. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's something in a lot of my sessions, Angela and Liam, and I know you may be in it so much in your remote first companies that when I'm meeting other companies from the traditional sectors, they don't realize how much remote first organizations do encourage these meetups. So there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, obviously it can be optional, it's not all mandatory, but there's a lot of opportunity for face-to-face meetup. And it's something that is a myth often that people don't understand how important that is. And that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you both in terms of the leadership development. So let's think about everything we've discussed, and there's loads of gems there to take away. But in terms of that leadership development piece, you said your skip levels, Angela, and I don't want to ask too much of a leading question here, but you probably know where I'm going. That for me, when I'm training in remote first skills, the one-to-one or these check-ins that can be called check-ins, one-to-one check-ins, performance, sometimes some companies call them different things, performance reviews, availability of that leader at the middle management at the lower layers that's managing the team or leading the team are really, really important in terms of keeping that trust active in practice. And let's not forget that that can happen in person too. It's not all, that can be concentrated for retreats and team meetups as well. But what is your rhythm, Angela, starting with you in your teams for those types of one-to-one check-ins? And have you got a policy or procedure on those? And I'll ask the same question to Liam. So I believe they're quite important. Do you agree?
Yes, totally agree. I have regular meetings with my managers first, and they do with their teams. We do everything in ClickUp. So we have one-on-one tasks with folks that we're meeting with. Best practice, most folks put in the task description, kind of your live, like what are the topics on my mind that I want to cover next week? And that way the manager or whoever's having the one-on-one has context before you come to the meeting of what are we going to be talking about? What's top of mind, right? So you're a little bit prepared and you can start thinking through anything that you want to have in that conversation. And then we also post the meeting minutes of what did we talk about? Like what are the action items you're going to do? What are the things that I'm going to do? So it's very clear, and we can go backwards at any point in time to kind of see like, what did we talk about last quarter versus this quarter, how we progress, so that when we do performance reviews, like all that detail is there. Or if we do transfer of, from one manager to another, that type of thing. So that's kind of a regular process. We try and do 3 one-on-ones that are more kind of tactical, 30 minutes, and then a longer one-on-one once a month where we talk about career development and more of the personal development side of things, so that people feel like, everybody wants to grow, especially, a lot of our team is younger. So we want to make sure they're hungry. Like they join a startup because they want to grow. They want to be able to see that when they leave ClickUp, and I tell people all the time, like, my job here is to see that you're growing somehow in ClickUp, so that when you go to your next gig, you're going to be doing even more than when you started, right? I want obviously everyone on my team to be contributing, helping us sell, get more customers, and be more productive. But ultimately, I know that you're here to make money and grow yourself, right? So that's really key. And I want to make sure that once a month that people are consciously, all right, put aside the projects, like how are you doing, as far as your career development? Are you in your path for your goals? So those are some of the like kind of practices we do for the team. And then once a month, I have an org meeting where we bring everyone together and we celebrate the wins of the last month. We do an MVP to try and like foster, kind of a little bit competitive, but also just celebrating wins spirit. One of the awards is a peer voted one. So I think that also helps build camaraderie in a virtual world, and people vote on each other's, like best helper of the month, most creative and innovative idea, things like that. So, these are all things that really just in a remote world, it's the async leadership, like you talked about, Liam. Like sometimes I don't have time to do one-on-ones with everybody, and we do it async on the one-on-one task. Like, hey, FYI, these are the top things on my project plate. no issues. And then I just, respond later, and, we can do it that way as well. We use also little clip videos, or like Loom. So
Yes,
sometimes if
yes.
something's a little more complicated, they'll be like, hey, here's the gist, 3-minute recording. It's in the task, and then I'll just reply there too.
Perfect. And I love the way you distinguish there, because I just, for the audience, Walt, to clarify, you can do, obviously in ClickUp or other tools, these async one-to-ones or check-ins, but I also want to, human first leadership is one of my key values. I also want to reaffirm what Angela is saying there, that skill of doing the live one-to-ones, which are, in the majority or in the main, or your foundation for that good leadership, is synchronously. I'm not just saying async, okay, but I'm saying we do need to have a balance between the two. And in my experience, particularly for maybe not the so much straightforward conversation. So you know what I'm saying there, if someone's uncomfortable or if there's something going on that's not so task-based. But that's fantastic, Angela. Lots to take away there. Liam, anything to add or anything different?
No, generally we take the same approach. I would say, though, from the top down, like from a first principles perspective, the first thing that we do that removes a lot of those issues long term is we do a lot of testing in the hiring phase. So we have a question which we pose to people, which is, listen, we really love remote work, but we think it's critical that you come into the office at least sometime, right? 1 or 2 days per week. That's a question that 85% of people agree with, and we don't hire those people because we do not believe that you need to come into the office in order to build a billion-dollar business, and that they can be operated remotely. It's actually one of our core values, and we've recognized that when we hire people that don't actually align to that don't drink the Kool-Aid of remote work is the only way to be able to operate, or not the only way to operate, but a very successful way to operate, that we end up actually having those team members either not be very successful or end up leaving very quickly throughout the organization. So we create questions in the interview process that make it very difficult for people to disagree with us on in order to actually move on to the next stage of the hiring process, which is relatively counterintuitive, but we've identified that it's very successful for us in terms of just getting people. There is a question that Peter Thiel asks, which is, what truth do you believe that very few people agree with you on? Which he asks every single person that he's going to hire, and it's exactly that type of perspective. Do you have the ability to disagree with people, particularly people in the eye of authority? So once you've built that entire framework, then it's a lot easier to be able to have all of the things that we just talked about, which is asynchronous management, the ability to be able to have those metrics be quantifiable. We have just three different colors inside of the organization with regards to KPIs: green, yellow, red. Green, you're on target, you're going to hit your quarterly number. Yellow means you might hit your quarterly number, you might not, but it looks like you're theoretically on track. And red means the trajectory is not going to hit there. I spend the vast majority of my time talking to reds, a little bit of time talking to yellows, and I just give greens gold stars. And actually, at the end of that quarter, we say, did we actually set the right KPI for you? Did we set the right goal? Because maybe we actually didn't set the right one, and it needs to be a lot more aggressive for next quarter. But then when you really boil down and chat with these people, particularly when I'm doing one-on-ones, I only do them monthly with people. I talk to people about the real stuff that no one really wants to talk about. What or who is pissing you off right now? That's the first question that I ask. Just totally open and honest. Let's get it out there. Let's try to, because we've identified as well, the vast majority of issues are not actually the core issue. There's an issue behind it, which is, I've got a problem with Rowena, and I've got to talk to Angela, my manager, about it, because there's something that's going on there that I need to be able to address. So it's who or what is pissing you off. Then what are your current priorities? We identified that they were these 4 in this order last month. Are they still the same 4? Are we reshuffling those priorities? And those are the 2 core things that I really sit on my side for a one-on-one. But in reality, and for people that are reporting to a manager, those one-on-ones are really an opportunity for you to be able to direct that meeting. So the actual employee, not the manager, should be the one that does the vast majority of the talking in those meetings, because your goal is to be able to pull information out of that manager so that you can do your job more effectively.
Beautiful, Liam, and like that's fantastic. And Michael Lopp has a beautiful article as well in terms of exactly that. The rant, what a one-to-one, an ideal one-to-one might look like in terms of you getting that hard conversation out of the way. Who's pissing you off? What's blocking your work? You know, we've heard it cliched a lot on social media as well. How are you really doing? But opening up that honest, transparent conversation, like we're moving naturally into transparency,
Oh, yeah.
aren't we there? Because if you build that up in the one-to-ones, people feel that they can share with you, right? If that's set up. So I really like that you've brought that up. And the particular actual article that I'm thinking of is the update to Vent and the Disaster by Michael Lopp. You can have a look at that, but it's about doing the perfect one-to-one, and it's about leading with questions like that. Not to what you've said, Liam, and I've seen it used in some leadership training about how to really listen. It's your team members' chance to get whatever off their chest with you. And I mean, Angela, you've got different ones that click up and they've got different purposes. But I think from an emotional safety perspective, from fostering psychological safety, from fostering transparency, that's something that I really like to highlight there. And we've all touched on it and sharing our experiences. Wonderful. So we've naturally moved on to transparency, and I'm just going to take a quick break and just quickly check and see if there's any questions that have come in. I think there's a couple, and I want to make sure that I catch them. But I want to go to you first, Angela, because you said that I really liked, you mentioned one of the senior leadership is really, really transparent at ClickUp. And I want to look for a story there of, you don't have to name names, but you've hinted at that you've got a very transparent culture. It's in your mission statement, it's in your values, etc. So give me an example maybe of, because when I think of transparency, and maybe it's just me, I also think of a level of vulnerability that can help with that transparency. Because if we're being real, right, yeah, we're being really transparent. See how I'm joining them together? We're often being a little bit vulnerable, because if we're being really transparent as humans that do the work, we're often being a little bit vulnerable, or what someone may perceive as a sharing vulnerability. So setting that question up, is there an example of that level of transparency from your experience?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the examples that we do on our solutions engineering team is call reviews. And actually multiple teams do this. Sellers do this with their managers and their teams. And it's a little bit scary in the beginning if you've never done that before, but it's basically the team is reviewing a call with the customer, whether it's a demo of ClickUp or just a sales call, and giving feedback. And by doing that as a team, we start with small teams so that it's not like overwhelming and people can actually discuss the content. It creates a culture of, one of our core values is grow 1% every day. And so it creates a culture of being transparent and willing to be vulnerable to get feedback from other people, because everybody's doing it. We round robin, it's rotating. We start with the manager and the IC, but they quickly, once you're on a team, it becomes, a circle of trust, and people are open to like, hey, help me improve what I'm doing here. And I think also because that culture is there and that trust is there, people want to do more and grow more. Like they're willing to help each other more. And it's in that virtual world where you have that. We start from even onboarding, like you get a buddy assigned to you, and you start, from day one, like having some trusted advisor, that person that you can kind of go to. So there's a lot of ways that we have implemented, transparency and trust in order to build that sense of it's being okay to be vulnerable. And I would say that in my long career, I've never been at a company that has that level of transparency and vulnerability, because people really legitimately want to grow. When we do our performance reviews, we also do 360 feedback. We use ClickUp and we track tasks and feedback from other people. So there's also that feeling of hey, I really want to help this other person. I want to know tell me, my peers, like, how could I be doing better? So when you create that type of, culture again, it really just kind of feeds off of it.
Wonderful, and loads. I really like. There's so much to dig out there, but in terms of the way that you're building that out, I mean, Liam said it too, from onboarding, from get go, you're weaving that in, so it's building the culture right through of that transparency, through the feedback loops, through all these processes that are also, as you say, building that because people are used to it almost that daily, weekly. It's that type of behaviors that are there that people can feel comfortable with being vulnerable because it's just part of what you do all the time as an organization. I really like that. In terms of your experience, Liam, anything additional, anything different to what
I
Angela
think
shared?
one of the things that I talk about in this book is radical transparency. So one of the other phenomenons that I found in studying remote first organizations that were remote before the pandemic is they had this culture of extreme openness that, Angela, I think you've probably discovered with ClickUp, is when you join one of our companies, you get, after a 3-month period, you get access to the P&L, you get access to our customer list, you get access to every single meeting, all of the document. If we've recorded a Zoom call somewhere, it's actually in our project management system. You get access to all of our projects inside of the organization. And what this essentially sets up, to your point, Rowena, about being more vulnerable, is it gives every single team member the same informational advantage as the CEO of the company. So if everyone has the same informational advantage as the CEO of the company, the vast majority of the time, managers are simply managers because they have an informational advantage, right? They know that we've got to produce this type of number by next quarter or everyone's going to get fired, as an example. Or they have some other type of proprietary information that is kind of on a needs to know basis. Everyone needs to know inside of companies that are radically transparent. And because of that, they magically end up making much better business decisions because someone on the front lines of the organization can say, yes, this is actually the core number that we need to hit. And I know that if I actually open up that number 7 or 8 times, I can see the exact metric that I'm accountable for towards that main number, which may be revenue, views, content, whatever it might be. And so you can build that out, and you create an environment where we had to let some people go inside of a department maybe about 1.5 years ago, and it was a very difficult decision. But when we announced this to everyone agreed that it was the right decision because everyone saw the numbers. Even the people in that department said, this is the right decision because we're seeing these types of numbers. And so creating that form of radical transparency allows for everyone to just be a lot more trusted and open and honest with everyone, and recognize that, at the end of the day, you can go and get another job. It's not that big of a deal, essentially, at least for the people that work for us. And I'm sure that the people that work for ClickUp, it's really, are you doing your best work? And are you truly serving the goals of the organization? Because if you're not, then let's find another department or another company that you can work at and not make that an incredibly negative process.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, fantastic. So that's very clear, and it very much supplements what you said as well, Angela. But we have to be aware that the webinar audience here might also find that something, because from inside your view in your companies, that's very much how you're operating. For them trying to grow more to scale up for remote first, I think the one question I've seen coming in also leans into getting your opinion and your lived experience on, your professional experience on, how do you practically train that middle management to handle some of these things? So let's be clear. We're all agreeing here that you've got very good recruitment processes, onboarding, that you're selecting a certain profile of candidate, which again, we've heard you both share openly on that very much so they hopefully are have got some level of leadership skills, unless you're promoting or working through a performance review where you're promoting process. But how do you foster for the people you do want to promote into leadership, the ones you do want feel have leadership potential? How do you train them practically in some of the things we're saying? Because I know even after 24 years in tech that when I was in my 20s and 30s, some of the way you're speaking about this vulnerability, about handling, say, a conflict resolution situation or someone being unhappy, I wouldn't have known how to do it in my younger career. I wouldn't have known how to handle it, never mind in the remote first environment. So how do you facilitate that training, coaching, mentoring? So I'm going to go to you, Angela, first, because we all know we need these skills, don't we? We know they're needed. So, and we may not get them from external candidate talent pools. So how are you fostering them in ClickUp? And then we'll go to you, Liam, afterwards.
Yeah. When we onboard, we have the new hire track, but we also have a manager track. It's a list of tasks.
Cool.
They go through those tasks, and some of them are async, a lot of them, right? With like recordings of trainings that we've done in the past, just so that they can catch up to where other people have been. We have monthly learning sessions that are put on as well to handle different topics, objection handling, critical conversations, how to coach your team, kind of like all kinds of managerial skills. And so there's a library that we have, in ClickUp that folks can reference. But there is a manager onboarding to kind of like foundation level set. Like, these are our core values. Here's our mission statement. There's a reading list, right, of top books that kind of exemplify the core values of ClickUp. Things like Radical Candor, 7 Dysfunctions of Team. The list of kind of key books that our leadership really wants other managers to understand that, this is the culture of leading at ClickUp. So I think that's like, it kind of gives managers the sense of, here's what you're kind of going to expect, but also ongoing, we have, like I said, learning series where people are continuing to be developed. But also, I think it comes also to feedback too. You have to be transparent and be open at giving that feedback as a leader of managers, so that they're hearing it on a regular basis. You can't wait till the end of the month or the quarter. Sometimes, like, if you see something, you got to be open to giving that feedback so people can course correct quicker. I think that's really key. Like Liam said,
yeah.
metrics or goals that you can measure against also helps, so that managers feel like, especially if they're growing managers, like, you want them to feel accomplished as well. So, like, let's review what it is that you've done, and help coach them, and on the next phase of what it is that we're working on.
Wonderful. And I think that what was really, really important to highlight on everything you said, lots of interesting things, was the timely feedback, Angela, because that piece, course correct in the moment. As we know, feedback, if it's 2 or 3 days late, it's not timely, it's not. So also having that structure in place is really, really important. Love to hear that you kicked that off from the very start with your manager track for training. So that's really fantastic as well. So it's from the get-go, and that you're fostering those skills. So we're answering the question for the person who asked it very, very clearly. I am a professor of remote work skills, and therefore, yes, remote leadership does take different skills. Even the way I'm moderating this, hopefully, is showing a little bit of those skills. So listen to the language I'm using. I'm using an approach called non-violent language. So listen even to how I ask Liam the next question. Liam, anything different? Anything different?
I was going to try to give you a violent response, Rowena, but
yeah, I know. Exactly. Yeah, a violent response. But these are the type. You could give me a violent response, but these are the type of skills that I think they're underestimated often. The level of skills that is needed for leadership. That's one of the things I believe from a lot of the reading I'm doing and the misunderstanding in the media world, certainly. But Liam, to Angela's answer, anything different you would add in terms of how you support those leadership skills at times?
Generally, I think you've touched on pretty much everything, Angela. I could add a couple other little tips and tricks that we also throw in as well. So one of the ways that I measure whether or not a manager is doing a good job is, if a direct report fucked something up, would they tell their manager? And if that's not true, if they would try to cover it up some way, that's not a good manager, and we need to figure out a switch really quick, because that is the only thing that you need to pay attention to. Someone screws something up, do they tell their manager? That's it, right? And when you think about it, at least the way that we operate, the management and those direct reports, they're all on the same ship together, right? They're supposed to sink or swim together. So we're all in it together, and our goal is to try to move this number, whatever it might be. And it's not management telling you to move the number. The manager is also accountable to that number just as much as the employee that's moving it. And so generally I found, and when we started running some tests for this, and we asked questions in a very sneaky way in order to be able to test for whether or not someone would tell their manager or not, we identified that a good 30% of people were not going to tell their manager if they screwed something up inside of the organization. So we've been trying to actively move that over. The other thing that we do that is a little bit different, and this kind of clicked for me with the founder and CEO of Shopify, Toby Lutke, who told me something that totally changed my perspective on management. He said, management should be a hobby, not a sport, at least at Shopify. And so one of the critical variables that we measure is IC rate, individual contribution rate, in terms of managers. And so we don't want any pure managers inside of the organization. We always want people that are on the front lines, like me doing this webinar right now with you guys, right? It's just, this is one of the numbers that I'm accountable for. It is, how much content can I produce in this way? What kind of outputs do I pull out from this content? And so being able to make sure that everyone has some of that frontline work being done allows them to stay in the trenches to a certain degree. And we found, at least, aligns everyone inside of the organization, where you don't just have people in ivory towers that are telling people what to do. Those people are down in the trenches with you. And no matter what the size we have as an organization, Toby from Shopify spends 40% of his time on coding and is the CEO of a $60 billion a year company. And when you think about it in that context, you probably should have better things to do, but it's more of a message to send to everyone, which is everyone works inside of this company. There are no pure managers, and I like that perspective. And it handles very well for remote as well, because you can see that so clearly through asynchronous management.
Totally agree.
Totally agree.
I love that. I love having my managers pitch in and do demos as well, customer calls. And you'll even see Zeb, our CEO, our founder, commenting on feature tasks, right? Reviewing designs, and it's all in ClickUp, so that people can see that transparency. And it kind of goes back to the other question on, somebody asked about the transparency and, sensitive data and how you control that. What we all live and die in ClickUp. Every single department has a space, everyone from finance, M&A, IT, ops, product, right? But with permissions, you can kind of control so that, like, I can't go out and see things that are sensitive to, hiring decisions or payroll, and HR has kind of got their most secure space. But product space, right? Marketing space, like if I want to go and find, this webinar and the prep for it going on, I just go out and search it, right? If I want to go and find a feature, like, are we doing this? What's the date on it? It's I call it democratized self-service. Like, just go search it, Google it, and click up yourself, and you can start following it. And, I have people that are hungry for promotion and, doing more things. Like, this is your chance to go out and, speak up and help a feature, evangelize it. So there's a lot of benefit to having that transparency. And it doesn't have to be a scary world where everything is like an open kimono, and you can kind of control it.
Fantastic. And Liam, I have another, that's fantastic, Angela. And the thing is that it's about that, as you say, removing that hierarchical leadership as well, that they're hands-on. We say, in Ireland anyways, back on the shop floor, with retail managers that are down on the shop floor. Liam, it's interesting you referenced Shopify back on the shop floor, but Liam, I know that John Reardon, ex-Shopify, also talks about how he used to be on customer service when he was running their teams fully remotely. He's ex-Apple, by the way. So I know the Shopify culture, which is a great example of that, was very much that their leaders were also very hands-on. They put time back. So it's amazing to hear that 2 years ago. And John Reardon also said to me, which I think is related to this, he said, who are you going to have a meltdown with in your remote team? Who can you have a meltdown with? And that leads back into what we were saying about that transparency, that vulnerability, that trust, that if you are stressed, you have someone you can lean into, whether it be your leader, someone else on the team that you can confide in as well. And that open, vulnerable leadership is something that he epitomizes for me. And I find it interesting you brought up a Shopify example as well, Liam. So that's really cool on that, to join them together. So let's have it. We're going to go. There was one question that came in on your comment on salary ranges and your balance books, Liam, in the comments, which is to do with, do you make or do you request that staff just sign NDAs if you're going to be transparent with them about all your financials at Time Doctor? So I'll just give you a chance to answer that. It's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can't. So what we'll usually have on our all hands meeting, which we run every 2 weeks, it's synchronous, but you can consume it asynchronously, about 50% do sync and 50% do async. At the very beginning, it says, hey, this is confidential information. If this information is leaked, you are the person that's responsible for making sure that that is not leaked. And yes, it's very, very important that we keep all that information under wraps. The only thing that we have under wraps that the executive team has access to, but no one else does, is the HR department. So that's a bit of a firewall where we don't have that information available to everyone else inside of the organization, because that could create it's not going to create more value inside of the organization. It's only going to create more pain and chaos. So that one is shut down, but product, marketing, engineering, to your point, Angela, all of that stuff is open. So you can just go in and take a look at it. And it's surprising. Sometimes someone who's joined the company like 2 months ago pings me and says, Liam, I was looking at a meeting that you did 4.5 years ago about this particular feature. And this is why this feature is shipped today. You're an idiot. Why didn't you, why aren't we killing this? Go and take a look at this timestamp. And I'm just like, wow, I'm super impressed that you're going that way back into the data to be able to take a look at it. But it's beautiful because essentially anyone can become kind of like a business archaeologist when they have access to all of our systems. You can go back 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and you can see why a decision was made because we have all the documentation, and the auditing is essentially there, which is really easy to get your head around.
Beautiful. And having managed and led big tech engineer teams myself in my career, I know that that's often the level of detail that engineers and analytical minds are looking for. So I think that's really a reflection of your team, Liam, your type of business, but it's amazing, that ultimate level of documentation. And we're going to wrap up, so I'm going to give a chance for the last couple of questions. Before we close, in case they come in, we've got a couple of minutes. I would like to go to conflict resolution, and I feel we've touched on it and weaved it through as we've been discussing the different topics. But what I want to dig into with a very specific question is, do you have a process, procedure, or training available in terms of the whole area of conflict resolution now? So Angela, I'm going to go to you first. You can keep your answer short just because we're running up to the end of time. And then you, Liam, anything in particular on conflict resolution you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, we have a session. We did a course on it recently, actually, on conflict resolution. And then as part of that, because we are virtual and it's so big with managers, it's like a management track. We do breakout rooms, right? So that like folks can actually have smaller group conversations, because it's hard when you've got like a teaching head. And really it's about, just as managers, I try and get people together afterwards to just like debrief and help each other. Like, hey, I'm really struggling with this one situation. Like the guy who didn't tell me they messed up, right? How would you handle that conversation? So I think creating that kind of open forum and regular time and space for people to have that is really key.
Beautiful, and I know Chris Dyer as well, who some of you may know, also talks to that same point that they do training on his team to do role play through those conflict situations. Angela, in a safe space, wonderful. Liam, we're running up on time, but anything to add to that on conflict resolution?
No, I know that we do have some training, but I haven't necessarily gone through it because it is for new managers. I would say, however, one of the things that we've recognized is difficult conversations should be hedged against building trust. So there's not to necessarily pull this completely off topic, but there's an interesting institute called the Gottman Institute, and it's on family dynamics and couples therapy. And they've identified that if you actually focus and train people on conflict resolution, it brings up their chances of getting divorced. It doesn't bring it down. Whereas if you just focus on connection and building trust without actually teaching people how to resolve their problems, they actually have much more success than if they were given that both pieces of training in the first place. So building trust is the absolute, it's like putting money into your bank account. And then when you have a big conflict, like someone screwed up and the servers are down and it's cost us, I'll give you an example, about 3 years ago, we had a AWS issue that cost $560,000 in like 6 minutes, where we moved stuff over to cold storage and we didn't know that it was gonna cost like a dime per unit to move it. And then the next morning I wake up to a $560,000 bill and I was like, WTF, what the hell is going on here? But already that person had said, I screwed up big time. Here's what happened. Here are the context of why that happened. And someone else would have tried to cover that up and kind of hide that and hand it off to somebody else. And I was really happy that that employee said, yes, I did screw up. Here's why we screwed up. You know, here's my way to solve it. And it ended up figuring itself out very quickly and easily. So build the trust. And then when you have those issues, you can hopefully get through them a lot easier.
Exactly that. Thank you so much. That's a brilliant last anecdote from Liam Martin. Thank you so much to Angela, to Liam for their expert contributions. Been wonderfully insightful. Thank you for joining today and wishing you all the best of the rest of your evening or day. You can grab the QR code there for a SafetyWing demo if you want it. Rowena signing off here from Tuscany. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Liam. And lovely, lovely to share this virtual room with you today. Take care, everyone, and see you on the next SafetyWing webinar.
Bye.